it's Greg here at maritimegardening.com, and I'm going to do a video on how to make oatmeal molasses bread and raisin bread. I did a video about a year ago just showing how to make a basic plain white bread. The purpose of that video was to give a really basic tutorial on how to make bread using the most basic of ingredients. I think in that video it is literally just yeast, flour, salt, and water. So, and I mentioned in the video that you can do all kinds of things, substitute in this and that sort of thing and play around with it. So I get lots of questions about what one could add to that. So since it's approaching the holiday season, this is the time of year people tend to do homemade, old-fashioned sorts of things. I thought I would do a kind of bread that I make all the time, most of the time in fact, which is a oatmeal molasses bread, which can also be a raisin bread. And in this particular recipe here, I'm going to make 3 loaves of bread, all by hand, and it's not going to take long. And one of them is going to be raisin bread, the other 2 are just going to be oatmeal molasses. So let's get started, and I'll talk you through this as I go. The video I did before with the white bread, it's a fairly long video because I wanted to be very thorough in my instructions and explain why I'm doing everything. I'm going to try to make this one a lot quicker and cut a lot of stuff out, just the basics, because if you want homemade bread, you want to get making it, right? So I'm going to try and make this video as short as I can, but still as thorough as possible. So, we got our molasses, we got our, I got this thing so my face is not in the frame because my face doesn't matter, it's my hands that matter here. So, we got molasses, we got oatmeal, or oats, we got some salt, doesn't matter what brand. We got an egg, we got, what else? And some water. That's about it. So let's get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some molasses to the bottom of the bowl here, and I'm going to add about ½ a cup. I just eyeball it. I basically pour it until the bottom of the bowl is black. The bowl has like a base. That's about ½ a cup. Okay, give or take. You don't want to do, God, I love molasses. You don't want to go too crazy. If you put too much sugar, if you're adding sugar, you don't need to add sugar to a bread to make it work. But if you're adding sugar to a bread, don't put too much in or the bread won't work right. It'll go all weird. So I have found sort of like a maximum of maybe a ¼ cup to a loaf. This is a 3 loaf recipe here. So anyway, I guess I've gone slightly over that. I'm using a ½ cup. No, that's less. That's less than a ¼ cup per loaf. ½ a cup for 3 loaves. But it should still have that essence, that nice molasses taste. So we got that. Now we're going to add some salt. I find I'm making 3 loaves, and I find a teaspoon of salt per loaf is about right. Yeah, lots of video YouTubers saying I use Himalayan salt, I use kosher salt, I use this for bread. It doesn't matter what you use. Any iodized table salt will work. But I'm making 3 loaves of bread, so I'm putting in 3 teaspoons of salt. All right. Now we need to add some water to this. So for this recipe, I use 4 cups of water, and I sort of do a ratio. I've got about 2½ cups of just cold tap water here, and I'm going to add 1½ cups of hot water that I just boiled. Okay, so 2½ cups of cold and 1½ cups of boiled water, hot boiled water, and that'll get you to about lukewarm, and you don't have to mess around with thermometers and stuff. And you put that in, and you stir this around until you've got the molasses, and you can sort of tell. But stir it around until you can tell the molasses has completely dissolved. Feel the bottom of the bowl. You can tell that it's just the right temperature. Just sort of like body warmth, right? Okay, so that's dissolved to my satisfaction. Now I'm going to add some oatmeal. Now, oatmeal really doesn't, in terms of your bread rising, the oatmeal, you're adding oatmeal because it's got flavor. It's got complexity of flavor that just regular sort of white flour doesn't have, right? So it adds something to it. But your oatmeal is really not going to help the bread to rise. It doesn't have gluten in it. So you don't want to put. The more oatmeal you put in, the more dense the bread's going to be, the harder the bread's going to be, and the less it's going to rise. So it really depends on what you're going for. I want a big, fluffy, sort of soft, still rustic, but I want some rise here. So for this here, I've got making 3 loaves. I'm just going to put 1 sort of heaping cup of, these are just quick oats. I have found, there's lots of different kinds of oats, but I find the quick oats, which I know they're not as nutritious, but they work better in bread, right? You use whatever you want to play with it. So I'm going to put sort of like a heaping cup in. You could probably get away with 2, and as you start increasing it, you start noticing the difference in your bread. Now, this recipe uses about 9 cups of flour, 8-9 cups of flour, and we're substituting 1 of these for oatmeal. So that's the ratio right now. We're sort of like a ratio of 8 to 1 sort of thing. 8 flour to 1 oat. So if you made that 8 to 2, that's a very different. You've gone from an 1/8 to a 1/4 sort of thing, right? So it makes a big difference. All right, so we got that in there, and you're going to want to leave this a bit of, it's going to take a bit of time for the oats to absorb the water. There's lots of different tricks you can do with the oats too. You could take these oats and put them in a coffee grinder and sort of grind them into a flour. That's another way to do it. But I find you don't have to do that. As long as they're going in the water at first and they have some time, a minute or 2 to absorb some water. Over the course of you working the flour and everything like that, they're going to swell up and they're going to be fine. Okay, so now I'm going to add some flour. Now, a lot of bread recipes, they proof the yeast. They add the yeast about at this stage and they wait to see if the water bubbles up and stuff like that. And that's a good thing to do if you've had yeast in your house for 2 years and you don't know if it's still good, or if you don't have any faith in what you've bought. I make bread all the time. I got yeast in my freezer. I just made bread last week. The yeast in my freezer is totally viable, so I'm not going to bother doing that step. But if you're not sure about your yeast, add it right now. Wait 10 minutes. If it's all fizzy and bubbly, your yeast is alive and carry on sort of thing. But I'm not going to do that here. So I'm going to add 3 cups of flour here. So that'll basically be almost half my dry ingredients. A cup of oats, 3 cups of flour, right? Because this thing takes about 8 cups. What did I add there? 1, I don't know how many I've added now. I've lost touch because I kept talking. Let's say this is 3. Right? So I'm adding an amount of flour that the mixture is still liquid when I'm done mixing it in. Okay? That's why. A part of getting bread to rise well and to get that nice sort of soft, fluffy texture that you like is activating the gluten in the flour. I know there's lots of people who say gluten's a bad thing. It's, if you've got, it's not coming to mind, but there's a particular disease that some people have that they can't deal with gluten. Celiac disease, that's what it's called. But if you don't have that, I'm no health expert, but from what I've read, you're fine as long as you don't, eat too much bread. It's all a question of moderation. Anyway, you want to. There's 2 ways to activate the gluten in the flour. You can knead it to death, or you can let it absorb the water and let it sort of swell up on its own. So I like to make a wet mix like this. I'm going to add the yeast to it, but then let it set for about 10 minutes. So here I got my yeast. The brand of yeast really matters. Brand of yeast, the type of yeast really affects the flavor. What I'm using here, I'm making 3 loaves of bread, so I'm adding a tablespoon of yeast per loaf. So I'm adding 3 tablespoons of yeast. This brand is called Lalaman. I don't get any money from them. I called them, they don't call back. So anyway, of the yeasts that are available to me to buy, I find this one makes the most flavorful bread. I can just smell, it has a wonderful smell. Sometimes the yeast smells like bad. It has a kind of offensive smell. And sometimes the yeast has a pleasant smell. This one has a very pleasant smell, and it makes a really tasty bread. So yeah, play around with different brands and try different things. If you make a loaf of bread and you find it just has a kind of funny taste or you don't like it, it's probably just the yeast. So, some of the yeasts that are out there for sale, the purpose That strain of yeast has been designed for how long it keeps, possibly how much lift it gives the bread, how quickly it rises, rather than flavor, right? Flavor is the most important thing. If people don't like eating your bread, they're not going to eat it, right? So you want to have a nice, tasty yeast. I found this one works out great. I'll put the name of this one up on the screen, but I doubt it's available to a lot of people. I think it's made in Quebec. I live in Nova Scotia. I know a good portion of my audience is in the U.S., so I don't even know if it's even available to them. But anyway, doesn't matter. There's lots of different brands of yeast, and I'm sure there's brands that are even better than this one, right? So anyway, this makes a good bread. Okay, so I've mixed in the yeast and I've made sure that it's all so now everything in my bowl is wet, and it's sort of like a muck. It's got like a mucky sort of texture. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to shut the camera off and I'm going to set my timer and I'm going to go do something else for 10 minutes. Okay? You're going to find many stages in this recipe is just letting it rest. I got this information from, I was watching Julia Child, and I think she, on PBS, and she and Jacques Pepin were making bread, or maybe it was just Jacques Pepin. Anyway, the famous TV personality chefs. And he kept stressing letting the flour rest at different stages. And he seemed to do very little work in terms of kneading. Still have to knead the flour, but didn't do a lot of work compared to what I was used to. And his bread looked great, and of course he's a famous chef, so he probably knows what he's doing. So I changed the way I make bread. I've seen people on YouTube with these no-knead breads, and there's a reason that bakeries don't sell no-knead bread, because it's not as good as bread that's been kneaded. That's basically it. And the other thing that irks me about a lot of YouTube channels is they just make one loaf of bread using some sort of bread mixer or something, whereas you're going to heat up your whole oven. You're going to pay for the electricity to heat up your home, or natural gas or propane, or however you heat your oven, or fire or coal or whatever you use. You got to heat the whole oven to make bread. So you might as well fill the oven with bread. So I find that 3 loaves is about the right amount for me. And it's really not that much more work to make 3. It's probably maybe 10 or 20% more work to make 3 loaves as opposed to 1. And you get 3 times as much. Right, so that's a good one for me. Anyway, I'll be back in 10 minutes. Stay with me. All right, so we're back, and I just thought I'd zoom in on the flour so you can see it's all kind of bubbly and frothy, and and that's because the yeast is working. You see all the little holes. If you put your ear really close to it, you might even hear a kind of bubbling sound, almost like it's on a really slow boil or something like that. And that's just the gas escaping from the yeast, working on the flour and the sugars that are in that. All right, so it's been 10 minutes, and now it's time to add the rest of the flour to this, right? Where basically all these extraneous ingredients can be put away. We don't need any of this stuff anymore. But before we do that, now that we're absolutely certain this has, cooled down, it's not going to cook this egg. It's just warm, like body temperature for sure, right? We could have added the egg earlier at the liquid stage. I forgot to, but you can still get it in this part. It'll still be mixed in really well if you add at this point. So why am I adding an egg to this flour? Well, there's lots of ways to impart flavor to a bread. And, butter is a good thing to add if you want to add a nice buttery flavor to a bread. But butter will work against the leavening process. You'll get better lift if you add egg because it's a natural leavener. So, and also I'm lactose intolerant, so I can't really handle butter. Adding, vegan margarine to my bread just seems kind of lame. So I put an egg in, and you get that yolk, right? You get that just adds another layer of complexity to the flavor by putting an egg in. You could probably put 2 in. I wouldn't put much more than that, right? And I'm going to crack it and put it in here, and almost like if you've ever seen someone make pasta from scratch, I'm just going to sort of whip it up right here. This is still liquid enough that I can whip it into the whip it into the moisture. Just using a fork, just sort of whipping it in. And also because, you know, I'm moving the flour around aggressively, this is like kneading the dough. So you'll notice all these different stages, and it sounds complicated, but it isn't. Basically doing stuff, I'm actually editing a video right now, and I'm just doing it in 10-minute intervals while I'm doing this. But you could be doing anything while you're making bread. You could be doing laundry, folding clothes, painting a window, fixing the car. Well, maybe not fixing the car. That's kind of, you can't be doing anything too dirty while you're doing this. But there's lots of things, or just watching TV, right, or eating or whatever. There's lots of things you can do if you're in the house for about 2.5 hours and doing something. You can make bread while you're doing that, because it's just you're waiting little 10-minute breaks where you can do something, and then you come back and you work on the bread for about a minute, you know, a minute or two. And you give it another 10-minute break. All right, so that's eggs thoroughly added to there. You notice I'm using a stick, right? I'm not using a spoon. If you make bread a lot, you'll probably find that if you have a wooden spoon, it's easier to use the spoon backwards, right? Use the handle of the spoon. Things like, you know, bread dough, they tend to break wooden spoons, but if you use the spoon upside down, it doesn't break the handle. So this is just a piece of wood off my daughter's crib when she was a baby. She's 9 now. Hardwood, so it seems to work fine. So that's what I use, and it's just got enough dimension that I can sort of use it to scrape the bowl a bit, you know, because there's always this little bit around the edge that dries on. And you'll also notice too, I'm not covering this in between rests and stuff like that. I just leave it like this. It's fine. I don't have to worry about all that stuff. Okay, so now I'm going to add the flour. I'm going to add it a cup at a time. I need to add 4 cups. Oh, and what kind of flour I'm using? For people that make bread a lot. If you want to save money making bread, buy your flour in a quantity like this. This is a 20-kilogram bag. It's like 45 pounds or something like that. You know, you save a lot more money. I don't care about this brand. It doesn't matter. I got no affiliation with these guys. But you go to a regular grocery store, that's about as big a bag as you can get at a grocery store. Right? We bought this one day when the restaurant store we get it from is closed. Right? What is that? 10 kilograms is about as big as you can go. And this is not cheap. By contrast, this here flour, which I got at a restaurant supply store, I live relatively close to a city. This is about 20 bucks for this, right? It works out to like your flour, your bread might cost you like 30 cents a loaf to make, pretty cheap. Also, if you're at a place like that, you can get a bit more specific with your flour. So this is like a white flour, but it's not bleached. So it's got a slightly darker color to it. And it just doesn't have the you know, peroxides and things like that in it. So it's I guess a little bit better for you. It's still a fortified flour. It's got, you know, thiamine and riboflavin and folic acid added to it, right? And niacin, some of those things. But what does it say here? Ingredients: wheat flour, niacin, reduced iron, ascorbic acid, thiamine, mononitrate, riboflavin, analase, and folic acid, right? But you notice none of those things are bleach, peroxide, or whatever. So maybe it tastes a little bit better as a result of that, because you know, bleach is going to remove some flavor. It's going to have some effect on flavor. This bread isn't any cheaper than the other kind. I wish it was, but I just use it because it's got one less thing added to it that I don't want, right? I don't need everything to be perfectly white. So I found that so I'm supposed to add 4 more cups of flour to this. I've added 2 so far. If you add too many at once, it's hard to mix it in and you make a bit of a mess while you're doing that. So it's a lot easier if you just add it like maybe a cup at a time, especially the more dry it gets, right? As you incorporate that, right? The mixture's going to get less liquid and more dry as you add flour. So now this was this, I guess, cup number 6 of dry to our 4 cups of wet. If you do a lot of baking or cooking, it's You know, I have my own cookbook. It's just this old black book, and I tend to organize all my recipes. If I find a recipe online or someone gives me one, I usually adjust a little bit. Once I get it the way I like it, I write it in my little black book, and the ingredients are always organized in terms of wet and dry. Usually you do the wet first, then you add the dry to the wet. So there's 6 cups. Let's add our 7th cup of dry. All right, I'll work this one in. I don't know why people feel they have to use machines for this process. I mean, I could see if you had arthritis or, you know, some sort of problem, like a physical, you know, if you physical problem, you know, some aspect of your body's just not working right. But to me, this is just another way to get exercise without going to a gym. Well, it's not a lot of exercise, but a little bit. It's better than sitting around. And the result is delicious bread with ingredients that I can pronounce. Okay, so now we're at cup number 8. You notice each one of these cups, I'm not leveling it off with a knife and that sort of stuff. That matters for baking. And yes, this is baking, but not the same kind. So when you're baking and you're using leaveners like baking soda, baking powder, things like that, all of those ratios become extremely important, because you're doing almost like a pure chemistry. Whereas when you're doing this kind of baking, there's some chemistry involved. It's mostly biology, really. This is more like biology and physics in a sense. There is some chemistry, but the chemistry is resulting in a flavor. But you're not relying on chemistry for the rise. Okay, normally most baking, it's chemistry that's giving you the rise. It's the right combination of acid and alkaline. Maybe your baking soda and your whatever acids in there. So getting way off topic here, nobody really cares, and I think people are going to start falling asleep if I get into that too much. The point is, you don't have to be perfectly accurate when you're adding these cups. Okay? And you'll notice as I'm working this now, it's sort of coming away from the bowl, and the flour, the dough, is starting to become one thing. Let's put it that way. It's starting to become a ball of flour as opposed to a bunch of wet stuff in a bowl, right? It's changing its state from being a kind of liquid thing to being more of a solid thing, although it's more like a blob, I guess, a blob thing. So you don't have to go too crazy here. We're gonna let time do some of the work for us. So for the most part, it's come away from the bowl. See how that looks? Right? That's good enough for now. Okay. So I'm going to leave this to sit for another 10 minutes. Okay? Back in 10. All right, so it's been about 10 minutes, maybe 15, give or take. I was busy doing something. Yeah, that's another thing. I mean, you don't have to be precise with these things, okay? Just make it work for you. But you can see that the flour has almost doubled in size, or maybe at least 50%. That's a short amount of time. This is not a fast rise yeast. This is just a standard baker's yeast. Okay, so we've got this stuff to rise. Now, I find it handy, if you've got one, and of course, all mine are in the dishwasher. I find a wok spatula is really handy for getting the dough out of the bowl, but I don't have that with me right now. So I'm going to get all this flour, or this dough, out into the counter here. I'm going to put a whole cup of flour. Make sure your hands are nice and clean. Take a wedding ring off, or your engagement ring, or whatever you got. You don't want to get yeast and flour underneath there. Okay, so we got that. And I'm going to probably use this, at least this much flour, to work the dough. But we're done with the mixing bowl at this stage. At this stage of the flour production, or at this stage of the bread production game, we're done with the mixing bowl. So we're just going to take this and get her out. You'll find it comes out of the bowl a lot easier if you, while you're, the stage before I took that last break, you leave a little bit of flour in the bottom of the bowl so it doesn't stick. And you'll find it comes out, you get most of it out. Right, there's very, very little left. right now, right? Okay, so that's done. So I got flour underneath the dough. Now I'm going to put flour on top of the dough. Okay, and I'm going to flour my hands. Give my hands a good flouring too. So there, we've added an entire cup. I sort of work that in like that. All right. Now, it would be very difficult, and I think this is what hangs most people up on making more than one loaf of bread at a time, is trying to work a big pile of dough like this. It's hard to do, actually. So don't do it. So what I'm going to do here, and you notice I'm just sort of pawing at this. You don't want it to stick, right? I'm going to cut this into 3 pieces. I'm making 3 loaves, so I'm making 3 pieces. And you know, it's not a natural thing to divide things into 3s, but I find if you, you can get these things at a dollar store. It's just, I don't know what it's called, a pastry knife or something like that. Not quite sure what it's called. And you just sort of eyeball it, guesstimate or whatever. These 3 loaves are not going to be exactly the same size, and you're not running a bakery, so who cares, right? You have to think about it that way. You know, a lot of instructions we get for baking or gardening or whatever are oriented about, you know, selling stuff in a market or whatever. But when it's just for you, you can be a bit, you don't have to be quite so precise, quite so exacting, right? And it shouldn't be, you know, I'm doing this on my day off. It should be fun. It shouldn't be an aggravating chore. Okay, so I got 3 balls of dough here now, easier to work. And so what I'm gonna do is knead this once. I'm gonna let it rest, and then I'm gonna knead it a second time. But the second time I knead it, I'm gonna put it in the tins that it's gonna bake in. You could knead it a third time too. I mean, there's a point where it's too much, but you can either do 2 kneads or 3. Every time you knead it, unless you overdo it, you're improving the elasticity of the dough and its ability to trap air. Right? The yeast is making air bubbles, and every time you knead it, you're increasing the elasticity in the dough and allowing it to capture air a little bit better. But it's no fun kneading, right? So my general approach is to give it about 20 to 30 kneads, if you want to put it that way. And the way I do it is that you take the ball and you just sort of roll it with your hand like that. And you make sure you get your hands nice and dry, roll it, and make sure it stays dry, right? You don't want to be doing this with wet flour. This flour is very wet on the inside. So what you're doing while you're kneading this is you're keeping the exterior shell, if you want to put it that way, of the dough dry by just having a slight film of flour on it, right? And that allows you to do this without getting stuck. So 2, 3, 4, and you're working more flour into it. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And just keep patting your hands like this. 10. See how I'm just going, I'm going to knock this thing right off the counter. So you're sort of going over like that. 1, 2, right? Like that. Half turn, bring it over. Half turn, bring it over. Like that. Okay. All right, this gets so easy to do when you get the hang of it. It's second nature. It's a little bit of muscle memory, but you know, this is the sort of thing people did for a long period of time before they could get it at a supermarket. And you know, sure, it's handy and convenient to buy bread, but you're buying you know, inferior bread for the most part, unless you're spending a lot of money for really good stuff. Okay, so that's been at least 20, right? So I'll do these other 2 and fast forward, and I'll get back to you in a sec. All right, so I've given those all about 20 or 30 of those sort of rolls. I guess if you really wanted to get a proper workout, you'd switch it and do that. I only know how to do it one way. If I did this all day long, I'd have to, you know, go both ways. But for some reason, I'm left-handed for this, even though I'm right-handed. Anyway, so just roll this around in the flour. Make sure it's got a good film of flour underneath it. We're going to let these rest for another 10 minutes. So my general technique here, instead of doing like first rise, second rise, third rise, I'm kind of doing like a micro rise or a mini rise. It works out fine anyway. I mean, you're basically letting the dough rest in between various manipulations, right? And we're actively kneading the dough right now. But the other stages of making the spread, we've sort of been passively kneading the dough, which is really easy, right? We're just letting time and physics do the work. But now we're actually doing the actual kneading. Anyway, so I'm gonna let these rest for 10 minutes. I'll be right back. All right, so it's been about 10 minutes and these have all risen a little bit. And there was one thing I forgot to do that ideally I should have done right at the beginning, and that's grease my pans. So, I mean, I think in the other bread video, I didn't grease the pans, I just put flour on the bottom. And that can work if you use it. These are just like regular sort of steel pans. Got them at Value Village or a yard sale or something, right? Cheapest pans you can get, last a lifetime, work really great. But they do need to be oiled. If they're really well seasoned and you're 100% confident that they're well seasoned, you can just throw a heaping tablespoon of flour in here, sort of dash it around, toss it out, put the loaf in. But if you're not 100% confident, you take some butter or fat or shortening or whatever, and just work it in. I like to do this with my hands. That way I can feel for imperfections. Sometimes after you wash a pan, there might be something stuck on there that keeps the bread from popping out. So I like to sort of just go in every little nook and cranny and just work that in. So I'm using just a kind of vegan margarine, I guess, because I can't handle butter. Can't digest it without great problems, or without having to put other things into me that I don't want to put into me. So I just opted to give up on the whole milk thing. So and I'm doing fine. So it's just fine. So there's one pan. You also want to get the top here. So I mean, what you want is when you're done making your bread, you just tip these over and it falls out, right? So you don't need a lot at all, really. You just want the pan to be shiny, right? All right, so I'll fast forward through doing these other two, and then I'll get right back with you. All right, so we got the pans greased, and I mean, you don't have to use vegan margarine. You can use butter, you can use lard, you can use bacon grease, you can use vegetable oil, you can use olive oil, you can, Pam, or whatever that's spray. You can use anything really, whatever aligns with your particular taste, sensibility, and whatever else, right? So okay, those are ready. It's good to do if you're using metal pans. It's good to do this right at the beginning so that oil can really penetrate. I mean, the more that whatever kind of oil you're using, the more time that has in contact with the metal, the more it can permeate, penetrate, and just make it that much more non-stick. Okay, so now we've got our 3 balls that I guess it's been about probably more like 12 or 15 minutes anyway, minimum of 10 minutes to rest. They've been resting for 10 minutes, and now they're really dough, right? Like, if you've ever, it's really good if you can learn to do this from someone and be actually in the room, but this is the next best thing. But you can sort of see the way I'm holding the top and it's not coming apart, right? It's slowly stretching out, right? Elastic, right? It's relatively dry to the touch, right? It's got that nice property. Should be like this, should be behaving like that. Okay, so I got 3 like that. So I'm gonna do my last knead. I need a little bit more flour actually. So I think we're on, we've gone over our 9 cup limit. So this first loaf I'm gonna turn into a raisin bread, and that is so easy to do. So first thing I'm gonna do is knead it. 1, 2, 3. Again, a 20. 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay, I'm gonna put that aside. I'm gonna do my kneading of each of these, and it's still getting almost like a micro rest, right? 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Give it a couple more because a couple of those were sloppy. All right. Trying to do this as fast as I can. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If you have too much flour, it's too slippery. Not enough flour and it sticks. Okay, that's about, let's say that was 3 kneads of 20. Now, I'm going to actually shape this into a loaf. And there's a particular way we do this. So, you take the dough and you flatten it out with your fingertips, almost like you're making a pizza. But what you're doing is you're making a pizza that is, the diameter is equal to the length of the pan. Okay? Pretty simple. Now, I didn't want to make all of these raisin bread, but I'm going to make one of them raisin bread. So I'm going to put about as much raisins as I can hold in my hands, probably 1/3 of a cup, right, on this. Again, it looks like a pizza. Now you can add the raisins into the mixture, right, and you could be kneading them and all that sort of stuff. But if you were doing something like I'm doing here, where you're making 3, and you don't want them all to be raisin bread, we sort of have a rule in our house, like raisin bread doesn't get jam, but non-raisin bread is green light on jam sort of thing. So we like our jams, especially this time of year. So the raisin is almost like a jam, right? So anyway, you do that, and then you roll it up. Like that. Again, you don't have to do it this way, it's just one way to do it. And then you pick it up, and there's the seam where the thing met up. You pinch that seam. Keep your hands dry if you want them sticking to it. You're pinching the seam. Almost looks like a Cornish pastry. Okay, so it looks like that, right? Then you get a little bit of flour. Put the seam side down. All right? And before you put this into the pan, you're going to score it with a knife. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Doesn't have to be 5. I watch one of these Food Network guys, or maybe it was a Netflix special, and the guy was using like a razor blade. Any sharp knife will do. Jeez, for crying out loud. So after you've done that, sort of just, you know, get off any excess flour. Have those slices facing up. And drop it in the pan, okay? Okay, I'm gonna do this one more time. We'll do the other one fast forward, but this one here, I'm not gonna make raisin bread, right? So again, you make it into a circle. A circle for which the diameter of the circle is roughly the width of the pan, or not length of the pan. Roll it up. Pinch the seam together. You don't have to do anything special. You don't have to lick it or anything like that, right? Just pinch the seam together. A little bit of flour on the bottom. Flip it over so the seam's down, and give it 5 slices. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm slicing it about 1/2 inch, 1, 2 centimeters depth. That's it. Toss it around a little bit. Slices up in the pan. All right, we get that all ready. Now let's go to the oven and move on to the next stage. Okay, so I got an oven here, and this is a cold oven. I haven't preheated this, haven't done anything. Cold oven. Open up the oven. I got one of my racks in the middle, one of my racks just one up from the bottom sort of thing. You're gonna put an empty pan, I like a stainless steel pan, in the bottom. You're gonna put your bread here. I haven't let this rise yet. I just put these in the pans a couple seconds ago. You watch me, all right? We're gonna do that. Now, we're gonna get boiling water. I'm gonna fill this pan as full as I can get it. So maybe that's 3 or 4 cups, maybe 3 or 4 cups of boiling water. I put that right in the center on that lower rack and close it. That boiling water is going to heat up this, so the oven's off, it's still off, and I'm going to leave it off for about 30 minutes. So that boiling water is going to heat up the oven, heat up the flour. The flour is not going to get too hot. It's going to be, basically the yeast is going to be in yeast heaven. It's got all the flour and sugar and stuff it likes to eat, and it's got this beautiful yeasty temperature and moist environment, right? So we don't need to put tea towels on top of the loaves. We don't need to do any of that because it's going to stay moist in here, right? It's going to be nice and warm in here, but not too warm. And the heat's not going to escape because it's a modern oven. And we're going to let it do that for about 30 minutes. I'll come back in 30 minutes. You'll find that it gets pretty big. All right, so it's been 30 minutes. Let's have a look at the state of things in here. So it's warm and, you know, humid in here, and we got a good rise, right? At least doubled in size. I would say it's about, you know, an inch or two above the height of the pan. That's good enough for me. I'm going to go with that. You could leave it another 5 minutes or so. Really, it depends, up to you. I find there's a sort of sweet spot. You let it rise too much, it goes weird. So I'm going to go with that. For me, for this yeast, 30 minutes worked. You know, depending on what yeast you use and what you buy, you're going to have to sort of, there may be a learning curve. My times and ratios might work for you. They may not. You may have to adjust them slightly up or slightly down. We'll go with what I'm doing here and see how it works. And if it doesn't rise, you just need to let it sit a bit longer. So oven's still cold. Haven't turned the oven on. Pan's still in there with the water. Having the water and the steam really improves the quality of your crust and that sort of stuff. And it helps the bread stay elastic and expand and so on and so forth. So I'm going to turn the oven on now. What am I going to do? I'm going to turn the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not quite sure what that is in Celsius. I'll put it up on the screen. I'm going to turn the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 40 minutes. Cold oven. Bread in the cold oven. 400 degrees Fahrenheit, 40 minutes, then take it out. I'm relatively close to sea level, maybe 200 meters above sea level, that's it. Just so you can adjust, you know, if you're somewhere higher up, you might need to change that a bit. All right, so I'll see you in 40 minutes. All right, so we're done. Whew. Put these out. Close a little bit. They're all done. Looking good. Close that up and turn that off. Okay, so it should just pop right out. There we go, that's what we want to see. There we go. Okay. Now, some people might say, like, oh, you know, they should come up higher. They should be, you know, another 2 or 3 inches or whatever. I actually like them this size because they fit in the toaster. Right? If you make it, a lot of times you'll go to, like, you know, a place where they sell homemade bread. You know, if you're a tourist and you go to, like, a down-home place or whatever, and they have these enormous, like, loaves of bread, and you try to fit them in the toaster, you got to cut the slice in half, and it's too long one way and too short the other way. So, you know, I like to err on the side of the bread being, you know, a bit more like that. That fits just right. And you'll also find that homemade breads are usually a little denser than store-bought bread, so you don't want the slices big anyway, because, you know, 1 slice of that's like 2 slices of store-bought. Really, you know, when you're buying bread in a store, they're selling you you know, a block of something that's mostly air. They're selling you air. It has to be a certain size or you won't buy it. But they want to put as much air into that volume as they can so they can sell you air. So you'll notice something like this has got some weight to it. If you're out in the woods or on a hike or something like that, it'd be a little more sustaining. And of course you get that wonderful fresh bread taste. So another little pointer when you make, I'm going to cut into one of these, but you shouldn't. Really, when you make homemade bread, you shouldn't cut into it until it's been like 2 hours, I'd say, at least 2 hours. You should just let it sit like this for 2 hours. It'll taste better if you let it sit for a couple hours. A lot of the gas and the yeast and all that sort of stuff, it's just, The bread needs to sort itself out and you should just leave it alone. But I know this is a video and I can't, I got something I got to go do, so I can't come back and do more on this in 2 hours. So I'm going to cut into one of these, and I thought I'd show you the raisin bread. It begs the question of which one, which one is the raisin bread? I don't know. I can't see one darn raisin. Nothing. No evidence of which one's a raisin bread. Huh. I wonder. Oh, I'm going to cut into one of them. And we'll have a look. It might be the raisin bread, might not be. I can't tell which one's the raisin bread. Amazing. All right, let's get a cutting board and cut into one of these guys. All right. I'm on camera here, yep. Ah, it's the raisin bread. It's a Festivus miracle. Yeah, I mean the raisins are all over the place, but anyway, this, yeah, that's the raisin bread there. So let's slather some butter onto it and see what we got here. But yeah, so I mean I can tell by looking at this that the bread needs to dry out a bit, and it will. You just leave it. So please, if you're making bread, do not do. I'm doing this just because I'm making a video. Do not cut into the bread right after it comes out of the oven. I know you want to. Leave it on the counter. Let it air out for 2 hours. Okay, at least. Right. It's good to make bread in the evening and just let it sit on the counter all night until the morning. Or if you make it in the morning, leave it all out until leave it out all day until evening. Anyway, let's have a bite. Yeah. Even though I broke some rules, there's still some damn good bread. God, it's good. Anyway, hope you found that video interesting, and I hope I kept it as short as I possibly could while still explaining all the steps. If you like this video, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. Check out my other cooking videos. I've got like a cooking series if you weren't interested in that. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your kitchen. Thanks for watching.